Other than that, we'll hand things over to George Tannahill. George is electrical engineer at the FCC laboratory. George has 30 years experience with testing of EMC and radio devices, the FCC Equipment Authorization Program, FCC Electric Filing System, and accreditation and mutual recognition agreements. Welcome back, George. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction and the opportunity to give an FCC update here. So I'll go ahead and jump right in. Feel free to stop me along the way with questions, or you can hold your questions till the end. I'll try and keep an eye on the chat, and if I see anything pop up there, I'll try and address it as I see it. So the intent of my update today is to just give you a high-level overview of the FCC activity since the last time that we presented at the ACIL meeting. Topics that I'll hit on today are the FCC update, the staffing changes at the laboratory, the facilities themselves, and everything that's going on with COVID and current events, certification numbers, just the numbers of applications for the year, MRA mutual recognition agreement updates, recent activities at the FCC, primarily rulemakings and report and orders that I just gathered a few that I thought may be of interest to the members. I'll go over market surveillance briefly, some standards updates that are in progress or where there's activities going on, although I know some of the members may know more about that than I do. Just give you an update from the FCC's perspective and open the door for questions. I'll talk a little bit about the EAS modernization plan to update our electronic filing system, and then I'll go into our knowledge database briefly and put some publications out there, and then talk about some information sources if you have further questions. With regard to the staffing at the FCC, a couple personnel changes. The Office of Engineering and Technology, the Equipment Authorization and Compliance Branch Chief. Last year, when we presented for this meeting, was Axel Rodriguez. He has moved on to a different office in the FCC. Dismantha Tinakun, who has been an engineer at the lab for a few years, is now the new branch chief for the Equipment Authorization and Compliance Branch. The FCC has also hired a new deputy laboratory chief. His name is Muli Kiffel. Previously, the deputy chief was Ronald Williams, and as you'll see in the update below that, Ronald Williams was the deputy chief, and he is now the chief of the OET laboratory. He replaced Rashmi Doshi, and that was an update in the last presentation. Other previously announced, but just so everybody's aware of the names and who works where within the Office of Engineering and Technology at the FCC. Ronald Rapazzi replaced Julie Knapp over a year ago as the acting bureau chief. He's still acting. He has not been appointed as the permanent chief yet. And the Office of OET's Technical Research Branch, which is actually the branch at the FCC lab that I work in, the chief is Alfonso Tarditi, and he's been the chief since the last meeting, but I just put that there so everybody's name was an all-inclusive slide. The status of the FCC laboratory, the lab is open to the public for mission critical situations by requests only. We're not taking walk-ins and generally scheduling things, and that's until further notice. Currently, all employees except essential personnel are working at home. For that reason, I'm giving this presentation from home today. I'm not sure what the plans are for opening up. They haven't made any final decisions yet, but it's been about a year that the office has been open for mission critical activities, essential personnel only. The FCC laboratory has taken the opportunity of having reduced staff in the office to make some upgrades that we could do some remodeling, make some upgrades without disturbing the staff or inconveniencing them with things going on. One of the things that we have purchased and installed is a 5G compact area test range for testing 5th generation mobile devices. Frequency range for it is, the initial frequency range of it is 24 to 44 gigahertz. We're still in the process of configuring it and testing it to make sure that it's operating properly. The goal is to have it operational the next month or so. Once we have it operational, then we'll also do some additional testing to see if we can expand the range of it and use it for a wider range of products. The lab's also installed a terahertz test setup for testing devices in the 220 to 1100 gigahertz range. And we've also taken the opportunity to upgrade the computers in the building so that when users do go back, they'll have some upgraded equipment. From the ones that we had been using prior to this were some very old equipment with a lot of upgrades and patches on them. Moving on to the equipment authorization and certification trends, just to give users some numbers to see what the big picture is. In the calendar year 2020, there were just over 28,000 grants of certification issued. Average rate for that is about 2,335 a month. That number was slightly higher than the number of certifications granted in 2019. It's not as high as it typically is. Typically, the number of certifications increase about 3 to 6% a year, but with all the other things going on in the world, our numbers held their own and increased by about 1%. In looking into 2021 to see what trends we see, the number of the grants of certification as of the end of February were a little over 4,500, slightly lower average than 2020, but that's not saying a whole lot because the window is too short to come up with any real calculations. Our numbers generally slow down in the beginning of the year and for Chinese New Year and for a variety of other reasons, and then they tend to pick up as it gets closer to summer, and then after the end of the summer, the numbers pick up significantly. One other comment that I'll make just as a note, we still are in the process of modernizing our electronic filing system. I have some more slides on that later in the presentation. The numbers that I'm giving you here for some of the changes that were made during the electronic filing process, primarily to allow composite filings to be submitted in one application. The numbers won't be comparable once we release the new system. The numbers will go down, but we'll still be getting the same amount of information in applications, and there'll still be a regular increase for the number of new products. And I'll cover a little bit more about composite devices and what that means a little bit later when I talk about changes as part of the new filing system. To give some numbers for FCC Test Lab Recognition Program, I believe we also have Jihad on the phone from the FCC lab or on the WebEx or on the GoToMeeting listening in. We've transitioned most of the test lab reviews and things to him. I'm still helping him out and overseeing the program. But here's some of the numbers that we have. We have mutual recognition agreements with all the countries listed on the left side of the chart. The new addition to the chart is actually the United Kingdom at the bottom. Previously, they fell under the grouping of the European Union, but as of January 1st and Brexit, that we implemented a new mutual recognition agreement with the UK and transitioned all their entities over to the new mutual recognition agreement. So our numbers, our total test labs, accredited test labs that the FCC recognizes is 591 now, or as of a week ago. That's a little bit higher. I believe the number last year was about 579, and they're distributed all over the place. There's 153 in North America, US and Canada, 81 in Europe, 351 in Asia, 6 in Israel. With regard to mutual recognition agreements, we have agreements for approvals where we allow recognized entities in other countries to do product approvals or equipment authorizations. We have agreements with Canada, the European Union, Hong Kong, Japan, Singapore, and again, the United Kingdom, which became operational on January 1st of 2021. The slide is actually incorrect. When I drafted the slide, it was correct. It says there's a total of 41 TCBs or telecommunications certification bodies recognized to approve equipment. There was one additional TCB recognized yesterday. And so there's actually 42 TCBs out there now, 22 domestic and 20 foreign. And those numbers have stayed stable. They're pretty stable numbers. Every now and then we get an increase or somebody expires briefly and then becomes re-recognized. With regard to recent activity, I'm just going to pull up a couple rulemakings that are in progress that the FCC has been working on. or there's activity in those areas, comments, etc. And I'll just touch on them. The first one on the list is FCC 19-126, which is effectively RF exposure or human exposure to RF electromagnetic fields, and it's got a long title. It was a resolution of a notice of inquiry. It's a second report and order, and it's also identified as a notice of proposed rulemaking and a memorandum and opinion and order. So this was actually adopted back in November 27th of 2019. It is still pending. It has not become effective yet. One of the reasons for that is we need to get it printed in the Federal Register, which starts the clock on when it becomes pending. There's usually a timeline, 30 days, 60 days, or 90 days after printing in the Federal Register. When the FCC references copyrighted documents, we have to go out and get an approval for that, and that has caused some of the issues related to this, not all of them, but hopefully in talking to the people who manage the RF exposure work at the FCC, they think it will be published in the next month or so, and most likely the effective date will probably be sometime around the beginning of summer, but that's not definitive yet. We just have to wait till it gets published before we can set definitive dates. One of the things that the FCC has worked on while it was going through the Federal Register publication process, we updated the KDB that is related to RF exposure devices for mobile and portable requirements and procedures, and that's 447498. As soon as the order has a known effective date, even if it is 30 days out, we'll go ahead and start making the changes and publish the new version of the KDB that tells people how to test the products, the testing requirements that are applicable under the new rules, I'll say. The second order that I'll talk about is the 6 gigahertz item, or 6 gigahertz operation as it's known. It's FCC 2050-51, meaning it was adopted in the calendar year 2020. It was the 51st order of that year. 6 gigahertz operation is from 5925 megahertz to 7125 megahertz. And it's for operation of unlicensed devices, unlicensed broadband devices in that band. It was adopted on April 23rd of 2020. We have a KDB publication out there for it. The publication number is 987594, and in the publication there's a link behind that, so if you have the publication you can just click on it, or you can go to the FCC website and search for it by that number. The publication was last updated on February 4th of 2021. We're currently accepting applications at the FCC lab for some of the devices that are authorized in that band. Those devices are low power indoor access points and clients. There's another type of device authorized under that procedure that's covered under that report and order for devices with automatic frequency control. And at this point, we're not accepting those applications or applications for those types of devices. When we do, the publication will be updated and we'll start accepting applications. The next report and order I'll mention is FCC 20-180. It's a notice of proposed rulemaking that asks some questions about updating our marketing and importation requirements to ease the requirements for products to be imported to the U.S. prior to marketing and being imported to the U.S. prior to equipment authorization, and also allowing for some marketing of the devices, but not the delivery of the devices prior to equipment authorization, which is prohibited both are prohibited under the current rules. The notice of proposed rulemaking was adopted by the Commission on December 10th, meaning that's of 2020, meaning that's when we published it. It had a comment and a reply comment period associated with it. The comments and the reply comment period closed at the end of February. The FCC received some comments on it, and we're currently reviewing the comments and determining how to proceed. And the next step out of that may be a further notice of proposed rulemaking, or it could be a report and order adopting some of the things, depending on how the comments went and how it's determined that if there's any issues, they can be resolved. The next item I'll mention is FCC 20-164. It's operation in the 5.86 to 5.925 gigahertz band. It's a report and order that was adopted on November 18th, 2020. Its basic function or purpose was to improve Wi-Fi and automotive safety for cars communicating and things like that, and in that area in the 5 gigahertz band. There were 2 erratums to clarify information as part of the report and order, and I have both the dates there. If you're interested in more, you can either do a search on FCC 20-164, and it'll bring up the original order and the erratums, and you can look at it and see what the rule changes were in there. Next recent activity topic is 20-156, another report and order. It's unlicensed white space operation in the TV bands. The white spaces are considered, if there's a TV in the Baltimore market and a TV in the Philadelphia market, and they can't be on the same channel, they have to separate the channels because they don't want the two to interfere with each other. That leaves some spaces in between frequency operation that aren't being used for high-powered devices or in the TV bands. We allow lower power devices to operate in the absence of other services in those bands, and that's what white spaces are considered or called in term for them. It was the 20-156 was adopted on October 27th of 2020, and its primary focus was narrowband IoT equipment and in the unused TV bands, Internet of Things equipment in the unused TV bands. The next and final one I'll mention here is FCC 21-28. This was adopted in 2021 on February 16th. It's hearing aid compatibility requirements for handsets, and its effective date has not been determined yet. It's dependent on the date of the report and order in the Federal Register. That typically happens within a month or so after the adoption of the order by the FCC. This one does require it adopts a standard in there, recognizes a new standard, C63.19. The 2019 version replaces the 2011 version. So the FCC does have to go through, because that's copyrighted material, the FCC does have to go through it and get approval to use the material and publish the information about it to reference it on our website and in our rules. So that's part of the ongoing work related to that currently. There's a KDB publication associated with the hearing aid compatibility for handsets. The number is 285076. We have not, because we don't have a publication date in the Federal Register or an effective date for the new rules, that we don't have the newer version of the publication has not been published. It's still the previous version of it. As soon as we have an effective date, then we'll publish the new version of it, and we'll know when the people can start testing and getting devices approved to the newer standard. One comment that I'll mention, just because the question comes up on a regular basis this year, it's administrative policy related to test firm and TCB accreditation. The FCC rules do require the test firms and TCBs, telecommunications certification bodies, be assessed by their accreditor at least every 2 years. The FCC has not changed this policy as a result of COVID. We do get a lot of questions whether it changed or not, or how it operates. The FCC procedures that existed before COVID and still exist now allow for remote assessments under certain conditions. One of the conditions is that the accrediting body has remote assessment procedures in place. Another condition is that the accrediting body and the entity have the capability to perform the remote assessments, typically phone, video, et cetera, the various connections and bandwidths necessary to perform an effective assessment. That the accrediting body can fully assess the competence of the entity remotely. If there's some reason they need to go on site for something, then that eliminates the ability to do a remote assessment. If the accrediting body determines that an on-site visit isn't required, then we allow for remote assessments. In some cases, the accrediting body does make a determination if it's a renewal and there were problems in the past, or for some other, there's a couple other reasons where they sometimes require an on-site assessment. And the other condition that has to be applied to enable a remote assessment is that the FCC is not required an on-site assessment. In some cases, if there's past performance issues or other activities going on that the FCC is unsure with, we will require that an on-site assessment be performed. So we do allow for remote assessments. That's a question that we get about probably once or twice a month from people. So I figured I'd put the slide in and just let people be aware of it. Moving on to the market surveillance aspects of the process, just to give you some numbers, the FCC defers grantee codes when we have market surveillance issues with companies. In 2021 and 2020, from those 2 years, we currently initiated 17 grantee deferrals. That means that they can't actually file a new Form 731 for the application or for a new application to get a new grant until they contact the FCC and we come to an agreement or an understanding of what happened in a surveillance issue or some other issue that we have, and they work out a plan to move forward. So the typical reasons for deferring grantee codes are failure to submit samples as part of audit and market surveillance requests, either to the FCC or to the certification bodies who report that information to us, or if they have an invalid contact. If we try to get in touch with a grantee and the email bounces back as undeliverable, we block the grantee code or defer it until we have a valid contact that if we need to reach out to them about their products. The number 17 is only those from the most recent 2 years or part of this year and all of last year. There are numerous other grantee codes that have been deferred in the previous years. The number 17 is a lot lower than in the past years for an annual number that we've deferred. And there's a variety of possible reasons for that. We did implement some procedures over the last few years to stop people from getting new grantee codes. If one was deferred, they're not able to work around a grantee code deferral if they're trying to be sneaky about it. We have a mechanism for identifying those and managing them, and that seems to be pretty effective. The whole deferral program seems to be pretty effective too. If they don't want to talk to us or the TCB when we ask for a market surveillance sample, the next time they try and go to get their grant, they can't do it. They reach out to us pretty quickly to resolve the issue and work out a solution for it. As soon as we are working with them in good faith to come up with a solution, in that case, we generally reactivate the grantee codes immediately. For the 2020 calendar year, the TCB market surveillance requirements are all identified in the KDB publication 610077. It hasn't changed in the past year or so. That defines what the FCC expects for market surveillance from certification bodies who are required to do it based on the international standards that they're recognized to and based on the FCC rules. Based on the number of devices that were granted in calendar year 2020, the TCBs are at a minimum required to audit or sample test 1,401 devices. Now, one thing that we did change was the reporting date for their annual TCB's annual market surveillance reports. For the calendar year 2020, the KDB publication gives them 31 days after the end of the calendar year till January 21st to give us a summary of all of the market surveillance testing they did. As they do testing during the year and they find non-compliances, they're supposed to report it immediately. That's a different mechanism in the system. But for the annual report, it gives a summary so that we know that they tested the total number of devices and what devices they tested, and we can make sure they met all the requirements of the publication. For this year, based on a request from the TCB Council, some of the TCBs were struggling getting samples or having personnel in the laboratories to complete all the reporting and information gathering on time. We did request the submission date for the surveillance reports. We allowed them an extra 2 months to submit it. So those reports will actually be due on March 31st of 2021. More than half of the TCBs have already submitted their market surveillance. They've completed the process, submitted their market surveillance summary reports to us, and we're in the process of reviewing them. But there's probably a quarter of them or a handful of TCBs that either owe us reports or owe us some portion of the reports that'll be submitted within the next week or so. Moving on to the next area or topic here are standards, and I'll just give a brief update on a couple of the standards that we've seen some activity on over the last year since the last presentation for ACIL. The first one I'll mention is ANSI C63.4. It's for testing of unintentional radiators. The 2014 version is the version that's currently recognized by the FCC, and that's been recognized since July of 2016. There was a newer version that came out in 2017. It's C63.4A. The FCC has not adopted that standard yet in our rules, but we did receive a request for it. Its use is allowed per a KDB publication, the 414788. My apologies, I didn't put that in as a link. The FCC is reviewing the comments based on the public notice that went out to adopt C63.4A and determining how to proceed. There's also a newer version of C63.4. I believe there's a 2020 version. The last time I checked, it was not finalized yet. I'm assuming once it gets finalized, the FCC will get a request asking to adopt it. And what happens when the FCC gets a request to adopt a new standard, we have a little bit of leeway, but the typical process is a request comes in to the FCC to adopt a finalized standard. We will generate a public notice asking for comment to give people 30 days, 60 days to comment on the adoption of the order. And then once the comment period ends, we'll review the comments. If all the comments are positive, it's very easy. Then we just have to find a report and order that we can use to update it in our rules and make the changes in the CFRs. If the comments are negative, or there's some negative comments with a majority of positive comments, we still have to go through and address all the comments. So we work our way through it and try and address the comments so that we don't get a petition for reconsideration. If we do go ahead and adopt it, it's easier to fix all the issues from our perspective prior to that. And for any of the standards that we get requests to adopt, that similar pattern is followed. We always do a public notice and allow the public a chance to comment. We review the comments, and then we have to find a report in order to apply the new standard, which effectively updates the references it in the Code of Federal Regulations and allows the use of it. It also identifies a transition period that we allow for the accrediting bodies and the test labs to change from the current standard that we recognize to the new standard that we recognize. The next standard update that I'll mention is C63.10 2020. It's compliance testing of unlicensed wireless devices. IEEE ANSI approved the standard in September of 2020. The FCC did receive a request to recognize it, and we're still determining how to proceed with the request. We do participate in the standards meetings. Based on the timing of it, it has not moved very far at this point, I'll say. The reason being is with regard to the election, the chairman's office at the FCC changes, so we now have an acting chairman at the FCC. Several people at the FCC retired at the Office of Engineering and Technology. So we're working on getting it through the process and getting it to the focus of the chairman's office so that we can make it a priority for them and make a public notice for it. So sometimes these things do take a little bit more time than it appears they should from the outside, I'll say. The next standard that I'll mention is C63.25.1 2018. There has been some discussion of the year of that standard. I believe it was adopted in 2018, but it was published in 2019. I believe the correct year for the standard is 2018. We had an internal ongoing discussion on that, and we did receive a request, a petition to adopt the standard. What C63.25.1 is for is the validation of radiated emissions test sites in the 1 to 18 gigahertz range. There's also two other .25s. There's a .25.2 and a .25.3, I believe, that cover different frequency ranges, but they're not as far along in the process. So the FCC did receive a request to recognize them, and we're in the process of determining how to proceed. The most likely step for both this and the C63.10 will be a public notice asking for public comment, a comment period, and then determining how to proceed based on the comments. The other standard that I'll mention is ISO IEC 17025 from 2017. We do allow the use of it per our knowledge database publication, and the FCC is reviewing it and reviewing the comments that came in from the public notice that we put out on it and determining how to proceed with it. So the FCC has also been participating in the development of the following standards: C63.29 for RF lighting, C63.30 for wireless power transfer, and C63.31 for the rewrite of measurement procedure 5, which is for part 18 testing. Once the standards are adopted and published and the FCC gets a request to recognize, we'll review the standards and the comments on the public notice and determine how to proceed from there. So moving on to a different category, equipment authorization modernization. I will say there's not a lot of new externally visible in this process. We have been making a lot of progress internally, but the process is moving forward. I've kind of cut back on the details in this presentation from what I did last year because the policies and the procedures are still the same, but I will try to highlight some of the things that may affect test labs in case some of the participants this year weren't in attendance last year. What is the EAS electronic filing system? Just some background on it. We call it EAS for Equipment Authorization System. It manages all of the entities, meaning test labs, TCBs, accrediting bodies, grantees, etc. It manages the 731s that the TCBs submit to issue grants for product approvals, and it manages the knowledge database publication system where we answer questions about processes to individuals, and we also publish generic publications to help people through kind of general processes with common problems. The current system originally became operational in 1998. The knowledge database became operational in 2005. The new system is a complete redesign. It's not an upgrade of the current system. It's a complete redesign of the database and the user access to put it in a more modern platform for better security, access management for a variety of reasons. All of the data in the existing system will be migrated over to the new platform. There'll be minor changes to the information that we collect. There'll be some additional information to help us manage the process better based on rulemakings that have happened in the past that we haven't implemented in the current system. There'll be some minor policy changes to allow us to better manage things, and there'll be a major change to the look and the feel of the whole system. It's a different platform. It'll look a lot different. We have not determined a go live date for the product yet. As soon as we do, there'll be a lot of FCC outreach. We're still working through the process. We're resolving defects that have been identified, trying to make the system flow better so it's more intuitive so that we don't get a lot of questions and spend a lot of time walking users through it. We'd like it to be intuitive and flow fairly well. We're working through resource and budget requirements for it. We are developing the system development lifecycle plans, and what that means is once we get the code and the software developed and the user platform configured, we have to have user guides for people, we have to have training plans, we have to implement a help desk so that people calling in with questions or issues with it can get directed to the right place or figure out how it works. We have to have transition plans for the data conversion, the data validation to make sure that what we convert over is correctly converted. Users will all have a login in the new system. That's going to be a significant change where most of the users with logins currently externally have shared logins. Now everybody will have an individual login, and there's some management and conversion associated with that to get the users associated with the entities that they typically work with. The production deployment of it will be in phases. The first release will be entity management, and it also include 731 forms. And like I said, the FCC will notify users and provide training opportunities for the various user groups as implementation into production gets closer. So the scopes, just to give you the big picture of it, as I mentioned, the first phase release will be entity management, which is TCBs, test firms, grantees, accrediting bodies, designating authorities, and also in the first, it's called phase 2 here, but phase 1 and phase 2 will go out of the initial release. The following phases of the project currently as planned are we'll remodel the KDB, redesign the KDB knowledge database system and push that out. And in the final phase of it, we'll implement the market surveillance, sample tracking, and any issues that remain after that. And we're not sure what the timing will be between the phase 2 and 3 and 3 and 4, or the order may get changed if there's a functional reason to do it as we move forward. Some changes that may impact test labs in the process. All users are required to have logins, individual logins as opposed to group logins. Read-only access as currently exists will be permitted with less information available. The same information that's currently available to read-only users will be available, but if you get a login, you'll be able to organize it and see some additional information that a non-authenticated or non-logged in user doesn't have access to. Each testing laboratory will have to have at least one user with a valid login. So when a TCB goes to submit a Form 731, the test lab that they select in that 731 will have to have at least one user with a valid login. They could have multiple users associated with the test firm, but at least one has to exist in order for the TCB to complete the 731. And that's all part of the transition process. Laboratories, if they have multiple users, will be able to expire users if they change staff and things like that. If they add users, there'll be a process for adding new users and getting them recognized to be part of the process and associated in the FCC database with their username. When we do go live with the system, there will be a brief shutdown to transition. Laboratories and all other entities, for that matter, will be asked to validate their own information. The system is 20-some years old. It has a lot of data in it, and we will do our best to validate it and make sure everything converted correctly, but we'll also ask for the public and the various user groups to help us validate information regarding themselves. When we do go live with the system, the FCC has at this point identified about 45 knowledge database publications that need to be updated, typically because they reference processes in the electronic filing system and say, when you're in the electronic filing system, click here to do this or something to that effect. When the process changes because it's in a new system or the flow changes, we need to update the knowledge database publication. So updating 45 KDBs is a fairly significant effort for the FCC. It's a work in progress, and we'll release them, something we have to do as part of the transition to the new system. The 731 exhibit types will be grouped slightly differently in the new system. We tried to reorganize them to make them more effective, allow users to submit fewer file attachments to us if they choose to. We combined schematics and block diagrams into one exhibit type so they don't have to be separated out if they're both required by a certain rule section. We tried to organize information that is typically held confidential into one exhibit type. So when somebody, a TCB, uploads information to us, the operational description, any other proprietary information can be all grouped into one file, and only one file has to be justified and marked confidential as part of the process. There's a new exhibit type for agents. If there's an agent associated with the 731, we want to know who they are and more information about them. And as a result of some of the changing of the exhibit types, TCBs may ask for the data that they get in a slightly different format or in different ways. So that's just to make you aware of it in case it happens as we move forward. The new system will also send out significantly more automated emails when changes happen that are related to a TCB filing a 731. There'll be some parties that get automated notifications. If a grant is issued, a test lab may get a notification email that says that a grant was issued using their name. Part of this is to make the lab aware of it, just in case there's market surveillance issues. We have had cases in the past where certification bodies have selected the wrong labs, or a test lab was, I'll say, not a real test report. It was a fraudulent test report, and a company agent, somebody submitted it to a TCB. The TCB used it as part of a grant. by notifying the labs of the grant issued under their name, they may realize that, hey, we didn't do this, and look into it further. So that's also part of improving our FCC management of our processes. The TCB scopes will be changing. Currently, there's 8 TCB scopes, A's for A1 through 4 for unlicensed operation, B1 through 4 for licensed operation. In the new system, we'll be syncing that up with the 18 scopes to match the scopes that test firms currently have. So it's not a change for test firms, but it is a change on the TCB side that may filter down to the test firms for one reason or another. The Form 731, the new Form 731 will have some more automated validations. The TCB and test firms, both TCBs and test firms are recognized for specific scopes. When a TCB goes to submit a Form 731 and they enter the equipment class and the frequency and the rule part, the 731 validity check will be put in place to make sure that the lab test firm that the TCB selected is approved for that scope. It will also check to make sure that based on the operating frequency entered for the device, that the TCB, the test firm, is capable of testing to the maximum frequency required for that device. In many cases, the rules require a device be tested to the 10th harmonic. So if the TCB's capability, if the device is required to be tested to 60 gigahertz, but the test firm's capability is limited to 40 gigahertz, the TCB is going to get an error when they try and submit the form, and then they're going to have to correct it before they continue the process. One of the bigger changes that we're making is to composite 731 submissions. A composite is a device such as a mobile phone that has a Part 24 transmitter in it. It may connect to a computer, so the second part of the composite is considered a computer peripheral. It may have Wi-Fi technology, which is a different operation under Part 15, which is the third part of the composite. It may have Bluetooth in it, which is a fourth possible composite filing. In the new system, all of those filings will be able to be submitted in one Form 731. In that scenario, currently, they'd have to submit 4 731s, and there's a lot of duplicate information. So hopefully the changes will, and the changes are optional. They can still submit it as 4 731s if they choose, but they'll have the ability to do it as one, which should make it easier. And that may just change how TCBs run their operation and how they request information from the entities that provide them information. Form 731 will allow, the new Form 731 will allow for additional multiple test firms to be selected if a device is tested at multiple test sites. The current system only allows for one test lab to be selected. The new system will allow for multiples. And the FCC's pre-approval guidance will change for devices that require pre-approval FCC review before issuing the grant. In the current system, we have a KDB publication, and the pre-approval guidance is initiated in the KDB, and then it's followed up on the Form 731. In the new system, it will be initiated on the 731 and fully exist in the 731, so it eliminates the repetitiveness of having to upload the same attachments to the KDB that were uploading the same attachments to the 731 that were uploaded previously to the KDB inquiry. There'll also be a second group of pre-approval guidance or category of it where there are FCC-initiated pre-approval guidances, meaning that for certain equipment classes, say new technology, for if a grantee has had problems in the past and we want to monitor what they are doing, the FCC can put something in outside of the regular the KDB publication pre-approval guidance categories to say, hey, anything that comes in this category has to go through FCC before it gets granted. And that helps the FCC better manage the process of the program. I will just emphasize, I've said it before, but users that don't have a login, we call them non-authenticated users. They don't have a username or password. Their functionality, the information that they have access to in the new system will be exactly the same as they have in the current system. The new system will have a different look and feel. They'll be able to view KDB publications. They'll be able to submit KDB inquiries without a login. They'll be able to view granted 731s. They'll be able to see a list of recognized test firms, TCBs, accrediting bodies, and grantees. The view of that will change, but the information content that's available will not change. With regard to the KDB system and publications, I've identified 4 publications on this page that are typically published all at the same time. They're related to test lab roles and responsibilities, what the FCC expects of test labs and TCBs. They're the checklists that assessors use. And my comment is that the FCC will need to publish these as part of the new filing system. We may also need to publish a version of these sooner. So I'm not going to go through each of them, but if you have comments, feel free to submit. If you have suggested changes we should make to them or comments to make them better documents, feel free to submit them as a knowledge database inquiry, and we keep a list of them. We'll keep a count of it, and when we go for the next version, we'll, if applicable, and we've determined it's good for the program, we'll go ahead and implement the suggested changes. Getting towards the end here, I will mention that just some general training opportunities. The FCC meets with the TCB Council. We have a phone call with them the first Tuesday of every month. TCBs have meetings twice a year. The next meeting is April 19 through 22. It's going to be an online virtual meeting, with the first day being basic training for the TCB staff. And the last 3 days will be the regular meeting, where the FCC typically has 1 day of presentation material to update all the participants, TCBs, manufacturers, test labs, other government agencies, on all of the various changes that have happened since the last meeting. We have other opportunities as necessary for training. With always, if there's an immediate question, submit an inquiry to the knowledge database. And this is just online information for reference, some various resources for finding additional information, most of which I've mentioned to some degree earlier in the presentation, but that's where you can go if you want to find additional information. And with that, I will pause and see if there's any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, George. Before you go to questions, I realized that I neglected, George, to introduce Jihad Hermes, who's with you today, who's involved in the processing of test firm registrations and equipment authorizations. I know that he's kind of observing, and maybe in the future we can expect to hear from him in your stead, or in addition to you. So welcome, Jihad. I apologize for not giving you a proper introduction.
No problem. Thank you.
I have a question for George. George Scott Wentworth, thank you for the great presentation. Always good information to get from you. I have one question on the new EAS system rollout. I'm just wondering, did that get impacted a lot in the past year by COVID? I think at one point you had maybe projected some timelines, and things have been delayed, and maybe you just found more issues with the system that needed to get resolved. I'm just wondering how that all played out.
Not directly. I'm sure there was a little impact based on COVID. The system is very complex. There's a lot of user groups, the programming team and resources. We've had some changes with the programming team. There's been a variety of issues for it. For the most part, all of the programmers for our system and the management of it are remote. So we've had all our meetings can happen online. We don't have to do a lot of face-to-face or be in the office for it. Some of the issues are making the system streamlined and flow better. Some of it are that when the programming team started digging down into the details of the current existing processes, they identified that they were much more complex than they thought they were. So we've had various rounds of user acceptance testing and identified numerous defects that they're trying to work through. And we realized that this is a critical transition, meaning the old system's going offline, new systems coming online is a hard cutover. And we want to have as smooth a transition as possible and not have very limited impact or none, if we can help it, on the equipment authorization process in general. So I would say probably no. COVID had some impact on it, but I wouldn't say it was significant.
Right. I mean, I have some recent internal experience here with rolling out a new system. much less complex than what you're dealing with there. So I can, but I feel some of the pain. So I can only imagine, the amount of effort that goes into something like this, and the problems that come up that need resolution as you're working through the debugs and validations and so forth.
Yeah, we have a huge variety of users who access our system, from super technical people to administrators to other government agencies to mom and pop companies who make products to huge manufacturers, and trying to find something that works effectively for all of them is a fairly significant process.
I'm sure. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for George? Well, hearing none, thank you, George, and thank you, Jihad, for joining us. We always appreciate the update. We've got a lot of labs in our conformity assessment section that are very involved with FCC testing, and always very interesting to hear what's new and improved and in the pipeline. So thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to present. I appreciate it.
Thank
Very
you.
good.
Bye-bye.